to Paul Galvin, who was the head of Motorola, and he built a lot of equipment for the Air Force during World War II, pumps, motors, things like that. Then he went into electronics, autopilots, radios, that kind of thing. And in 1955, started developing his first airplane, which was a modification of the Lockheed L-18 Lockheed Lodestar, and it became known as the Lear Star. And that was his first attempt. He sold 62 of those. It was a mildly successful airplane, but in 1958-59, he wanted to build a business jet, and he ended up building the Lear jet, which is one of the most successful business jets going.
I think it's such even just thinking of it, it has such a status ring to it on top of it all for people always aspiring that that's one of the things that they might like to have for the mobility.
Yeah, it was the first one. It wasn't the first one. It wasn't the first business jet, but it was the one with the most pizzazz. He also invented 8-track stereo when that was big, and if you still have any 8-track stereo cartridges, just turn it over and you'll see the name Learjet on the back of them. It's not very popular anymore because, of course, it's been outmoded. But
I still have some.
Yeah, just turn it over and you'll see the
I'll go
trademark.
home and look right away. Wow, that's so fascinating. And so, was he in the military during all of this, or was he more of an entrepreneur?
More of an entrepreneur. He never was in the military, although he surrounded himself with all kinds of top military people.
Mm-hmm. And what did that mean to you as a young man? What did you see yourself doing?
I always just wanted to be a pilot, and it's all I ever wanted to be. And it irritated him, as odd as that may sound. We came, when I was 18, we agreed to part. I was essentially disowned over my desire to become an airline pilot, and but I've stuck with that, and I have been an airline pilot for about 32 years.
And so, as you became more deeply involved in becoming an airline pilot, what was the speed records all about? What drove you on to wanting to go faster?
Well, the speed records were when the number 100th Learjet came out. It was a new model. They had gone from the Model 23 to 24. It was certificated to airline standards, the 24 was, and they wanted to make a big splash. So I went with 2 other factory pilots and a NAA representative, and we set the round the world speed record, which in those days was elapsed time, I think, like 65 hours. And now it's almost been cut in half. I think Alan Paulson holds it now in the Gulfstream 4.
Mm-hmm. Well, Marina Popovich has been in town in California. Have you been able to communicate with her at all?
No, I saw her at one of the UFO expos, but I haven't seen her recently.
I see. I wasn't sure because she does test piloting, but of course she was Air Force and in Russia, so I didn't really know if you two would have something possibly interesting. She's really a very loving and interesting person, actually. We had her on the program here as well. Okay, and so all of these years go by, and where did the UFO interest come from?
Well, just to go back a little bit, I've flown in about 65 different countries. I've flown for 28 airlines and different services. I flew in Southeast Asia between 66 and 73 for Department of the Government. And I did a lot of interesting flying all over. I really wasn't interested in UFOs, except that my dad used to talk about them occasionally. He was very convinced that they existed. In 1956, he made a statement that was quoted worldwide saying that, yes, UFOs did exist, and they were piloted by beings from other planets. This was most distressful to the Pentagon because he was a major manufacturer, and it was big time. And at that time, even now, the government doesn't want reputable people talking about UFOs. So it was always in the back of my mind, and as a pilot, long hours of flying with other pilots, you get to talking about different things and strange things you've seen, and maybe 1/3 of all pilots that I ever talked to have seen something, but I never had.
Mm-hmm.
Then in 1985, a friend of mine who was getting out of the Air Force and going into the reserve came by Nellis Air Force Base, which is in Las Vegas, where I live. This guy and I had flown together in Laos, the Secret War in Laos, and knew him well. I hadn't seen him since the end of the war in '73, and he came over and we're talking about what his plans were and where all he'd been and where he'd been based. And he mentioned that he'd been based at Bentwaters. Well, in 1980, everybody knew that, or most people know the story of a flying saucer that landed on the Bentwaters. It's a United States Air Force base about 70 miles northeast of London.
Mm-hmm.
And there had been this story that a saucer landed and 3 aliens got out and walked up to the general of the base commander, General Gordon Williams, who's now retired and lives in Redland. So when he said Bentwaters, they said, oh, Bentwaters, that's supposedly where that flying saucer landed in 1980. He said, no, John, not supposedly, it did. He said, I didn't see it because I was confined to quarters. But I know the guys who did, and I got the whole story. And I said, wait a minute, you mean this is true? There are UFOs and aliens? He said, yeah, there sure are. Well, I thought I knew a lot about, you know, secret government goings-on, and I had been interested in black airplanes, secret airplanes, the SR-71, U-2, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. But I guess I had missed the boat because I didn't know that much about UFOs. And now to find out that a very good friend of mine, a very knowledgeable friend, was saying it was true, I thought that I better find out what was going on. So I spent the next 2 years writing, making phone calls. I traveled throughout the Southwest, and this is in between my flying, interviewing people. I quickly found out that nobody would talk to you over the phone, but if you got certain people by themselves and discussed this, they would tell you something. And in the end of 1987, I wrote what became known as the infamous John Lear hypothesis, and it was basically the story as I understood it of what had happened. And
is that something such as the article that I had read out of the Whole Life Times?
Yeah, basically that we had recovered a disc in 1947. Had since then recovered up to 40 different discs. That we had recovered at least 3 live aliens, and it goes on and on and on.
Yes.
And so I got into the field, and due to my contacts that I had gained over the years, I had access to information that other people didn't. So I became very outspoken. At that time, I felt that this was something the public deserved to know, that we are not the only ones. Now I've changed my mind. I don't think, it's not that they don't deserve to know, they don't need to know, and I understand why the government is covering it up.
Was there any initial effort on anybody's part that heard you speaking out about even the most minor detail that tried to silence you in any way? Never in any way.
I've never had any strange thing happen. The only thing is in 1988, the summer of 1988, I did an interview on a station in Las Vegas. And that was when I first came out and said, yes, there is a live alien at the Nevada test site at Groom Lake, and yes, we have discs there from, you know, other planets. And the next morning I was out working on my lawn, changing sprinklers, and I saw a little airplane flying right directly over my house. Now this is unusual because I live right next to Nellis, and there's a control area there where normally airplanes don't fly in and out of, and they don't circle. So I looked at him for a while, and it kind of looked odd. It was just a small airplane, a Cessna 182, and it kept doing it. So I thought, geez, I wonder if I got time to go and get some binoculars. So I kind of walked up to the house and came back with binoculars and looked at it, and it was an airplane. It had no registration numbers, but under it, it had a camera opening, a camera door on the bottom of the airplane. And so I thought that was a little odd, and I said, gee, it'd be nice if I could get a picture of that. I probably don't have time, though, but, well, you know, I'll go up and... So I walked up to the house and got my camera, came back, you know, and took some pictures, but I didn't have a telephoto lens. Now, You got to understand that, you know, now 15 minutes has passed and it's still going around.
Still going around. Wow.
So then I thought, well, geez, I wonder if I have time to get my telephoto lens. So I walked up to the house, got my 600mm telephoto lens, and as I snapped 3 pictures, he straightened out and went over towards Nellis, and we haven't developed, and it was a camera, airplane, but there was no registration or markings or any markings of any kind. That's the only strange thing that's happened, other than my telephone has been tapped. And people say, oh, well, you're just paranoid. But that's, I may be paranoid, but my telephone certainly is tapped, and it was told to me by a Centel representative up in Las Vegas, who did a lot of work for me, installing different lines. And one day he said, John, did you know your phone is tapped? And I said, no. He said, would you like me to find out where the tap is? And I said, yeah. And so he came back a half an hour later. He said, John, he said, I went to Monroe, and then I went down to Hollywood and to Bonanza, and he said, it's farther than that. And he said, just out of curiosity, I'm going to find out where your phone is tapped. He, that afternoon, found out that it was tapped at the mainframe in Centel. And he went to the FBI and told them what he had discovered. And they said, point blank, if you don't like your job, quit. He went back to work the next morning, and he saw the FBI lady that he had told this to walking out of his boss's office, and he just came up to me and said, John, look, I need my job, so, you know, I won't be able to talk to you anymore. But the phone was definitely tapped. Other than that, there's been no threats of any kind.
I think one of the most severe things about ufology in general that I come up against is the rumor factory. Everybody's got a rumor about a UFO, about an alien, about something. And I find that the majority, once I just come out, I asked you a couple of questions before the show and just blatantly asked, and you hadn't heard anything like that. And the majority of people I ask, let's say you hear this, whatever the story is, and I'll ask someone who I feel is in the know about that, and every time it's something that they honestly say, no, they've never heard of anything like that happening. Whether it's a person disappearing who was looking for one or whatever in the world it is. So there's a lot of false mystery.
There is a lot of false rumors like that go around, and like up in the Lancaster area, the Antelope Valley, strange structures that are in the ground and are built over there. And I try to explain this. Look, those are radar towers that they put different airfoils on, and they shoot radar beams at it to see what the reflectivity is. And there's a lot of those up there, but people want to make them mysterious UFO stuff. They're not. The UFO stuff goes on up at Groom Lake, Nevada, and it's a very, very secure place. It's actually 10 miles south of Groom Lake at a place called S4. And the reason I know is I met a young scientist in the summer of 1982, or 1988, who came with a friend of mine to my house. And this guy, the scientist, was very well qualified. He formerly worked at Los Alamos as a physicist. He had 2 degrees from MIT. Very, very knowledgeable. And we started talking UFOs to him, and he said, you know, this baloney. He said it doesn't exist. He said, you know, I have enough secret clearances that if it did, I would know. Over the next 4 months, we gave him enough information that he thought, well, wait a minute. What is going on? And we finally prompted him to look for and get a job up at Groom Lake. Now, the way you do that is you go to EG&G, which is the largest contractor in Nevada, Edgerton, Gurmishausen, and Greer. They contract all the nuclear testing and all the nuclear and all the test site projects.
I see.
Due to, well, to backstep a little bit here, he wrote a letter to Dr. Edward Teller, father of the H-bomb, because he knew him, and said, you know, I'd like to work back in the government again, because he'd left for 3 or 4 years. And Teller called him on the phone and said, we can either have you work down there in Las Vegas with EG&G or up here at Lawrence Livermore. And Bob said, I want to work at Groom Lake. So there was about a minute silence on the end of the phone, and then Teller said, let me get back with you. Over the next month or so, Bob received about 3 security interviews and job interviews, very, very technical, which he passed with flying colors. And the first I knew of it, we're now December of 1988, he came over to my house and one evening. And I'm sitting at my desk writing out checks, and he says, I said, "What's going on, Bob?" He said, "I saw a disc today." And I looked up and I said, I didn't think I heard him. I said, "What?" And he said, "I saw a disc today." And I kind of thought he was joking. I said, I thought he was joking. I said, "Theirs or ours?" He said, "Theirs." And I said, "Did you go to the test site?" And he said, "Yeah, I just got back." I said, "Wait a minute. If you just got back, what are you doing here? You worked there for a couple of months and then come and see me. You're going to lose your clearance." He said, "No, you've taken enough flack over the years for what you've been saying. I wanted to tell you it's true. They do have 9 of them up there. There is a live alien up there." And on and on and on.
Yes.
We talked for 3 hours and 47 minutes. The reason I know is because he was followed up there and asked why he had come up to my house and on and on.
Wow.
Anyway, Bob did work there for about 4 months, and the only reason he didn't work there any longer, well, there's several reasons, is on March 21st, 1989, I was over at his house. He said, "John, they're going to test fly one of the discs tomorrow. Do you want to go watch it?" And I said, "Sure, how?" And he said, "Well, I know a place we can sneak in behind the test site, still be on public land, and we'll watch it. We'll be about 10 miles away." And great. So we drove up there with a mutual friend of ours, Gene Huff, and I set up my Celestron 8 telescope because it was going to be about 10 miles away. And he had said they always tested at sunset because they could, if anything came up, they could always say, "Well, that was the planet Venus," or something like that.
Yes.
But we were up there, and we'd no sooner parked and set up everything, and lo and behold, this disc comes up and starts doing all these maneuvers, and I got a good view of it through the Celestron 8 telescope. I mean, really close up. There was no question about it. It was a disc.
Now, is that something about what you brought us in drawings here? Does that have something to do with it?
The drawings that I brought today are some of the, yes, one of the discs that Bob saw. There was 9 different ones up there. All had the same power source, but they were all designed different.
Did you want to take just a moment and maybe show us this so we're sure to be able to get it in?
Okay. This right here is what the hangars look like up at S4. There's 9 of them in a row. They're slanted into the hillside. They're at an angle of about 45 degrees, and these doors, when they come down, they're covered with sand, so it's camouflaged, so to speak, and aerial photography couldn't pick it out. This is a disc that Bob worked on. He only worked on one. His job at this facility was to back engineer the propulsion system, which is about 500 million years ahead of us in technology. Although we can understand it, there's no way we can duplicate it. But anyway, his job was to try and duplicate it with present-day materials. He said it was impossible. It was ridiculous. But anyway, that was his job. There was 3 levels. There was the lower level here, which is where the gravity amplifiers were. There was the main level here, which is where the antimatter reactor was, and there was another upper level, which he was not allowed to go into. We made this drawing representative of Bob's size, which is 5'8", where his head almost came to the top of the disc in relationship to the little beings that flew this. And there was little seats around there. As a matter of fact, one of the things that when Bob was taken up there, one of the most shocking things is he saw the disc. And he thought, well, that's no problem. We could certainly make that, you know, and that's no big a deal. But when he was taken inside and shown it, there was these little small chairs, small furniture. And that's when he, you know, got the realization, this is not ours. This is from somewhere else. And then when he got briefed on the technology, he realized that this was something really more than he had ever imagined.
I know when Marina Popovich and I were together, she goes with certain photographs, which of course are unable to be aired. Nothing scary or anything like that, but with pictures of beings from other places that have been found, some living and some not living, though nothing terrible. And we both discussed before the show, and I think my audience knows that we're fairly open-minded here, and that we're interested in expanding our consciousness and our awareness and just our basic learning so that we don't feel so afraid of life. And I think that's a very important thing to bring out, is that the fact is that if our egos are so large at this point in time, in the present moment, that we feel that we are all that could possibly exist anywhere else, then we're already in trouble. And the fact that if we were to find out that there was other life, other places, to a person like myself, this would almost be a relief. And it's not like, oh, space brother. It's not a science fiction movie. It's real life. And I'm sure that wherever other people live or other beings live or other plant life, they experience their problems just as we do right here.
Exactly, and I can assure you that many of them are not our space brothers. But we're being visited or watched or whatever by about 80 different species that the government knows of right now. In 1963, they were aware of 17 different species. I think we have open, ongoing communication with 5 different species, at least. The contacts I have up at the Nevada test site say they've seen the 5 different species there. But yes, it's ridiculous to think that we are the only ones, but the government nurtures this belief. We are the only ones. Yes, we discovered a planet. We thought we discovered a planet 30,000 light years from here, but darn, it wasn't really a planet. But if you look at the possibilities of life, our sun is in the solar spectral scale in G2, and that means it's not too hot, not too cold. If there were planets around it that weren't too far away so that they freeze, or too close that they would get too hot and nurture life, life as we know it, there must be a million G2 solar spectral stars. That means there's at least a million possibilities of life, and of course there are. But this is carefully nurtured by the government to believe that, no, we're the only ones, that we evolved from the sea, and it just looked at the odds of something, of a microbe coming out of the sea and evolving into a human or a tree or something else over 18 billion years. I mean, it's ridiculous. It'd
be like wandering up to a salamander and going, Mom.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yes.
But
yes. The interesting thing is, it would be like keeping the truth from your children, for whatever reason that is. And all of a sudden one day you tell them and you shock them, instead of giving them little bits of the truth all along, you know, treating them as though they're maturing also. And it just seems a shame to me that so-called government, which is not really governing anything at all, has that effect on people. And so we've got about 4 minutes left in our program today, and I thought maybe it would be a good idea for you to talk a little bit about the container theory.
It's not exactly a theory, but what Bob, this physicist, read in the documents that he read at the test site when he was accepted into this program. It was a very high-level, top-secret program, and his job was back in engineering. But one of the briefing papers that he read was that the human race is referred to as containers by the people who genetically engineered us. We didn't come out of the sea. Nobody made us out of clay. We were genetically engineered, and it was an experiment. They made 64 or 65 external corrections to make us what we are today. It's just an experiment. And so referring to us as containers, the document didn't spell out what we contain, but we can assume it's probably the soul, which they do experiments with, and there's a lot of evidence that leads to believe that, yes, they are experimenting with the soul.
In the last minute or so we have left, is there some other information you'd like to share with our audience?
I think that's about all they can handle for right now.
John Lear, I want to thank you very much for coming on the program today. I really appreciate your flying in for it. I found you very fascinating, and I'm sure the whole audience appreciates you sharing your information.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot. To our audience, we've been in conversation with John Lear, who has flown in from Las Vegas to be on the program today and talk to us a bit about some of the information that he has collected about UFOs. And who does know the truth? I think within us all, we all know the truth. Spend a little time thinking about it. You know who I am. I'm Valli Amon, the New Age reporter. You've been watching Visions, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching.